Welcome to today's episode of Hermetically Speaking, and I am your host, Toriea, where we will be exploring the various types of PTSD, and I will be breaking down PTSD generically, as well as complex and compound, and dissecting them in a more introspective way. And we're viewing each one through the lens of, you guessed it, mystic psychology, where I prove to you more and more all about the alchemical mind. What is that, you may ask? It means our minds are magic. If you are unfamiliar with the term mystic psychology, I would recommend you go to the previous episode that is all about mystic psychology and my reintroduction of it back into this modern day, third to sixth dimensional society. To sum up disclaimers very briefly, I am not a medical professional by any standards. What I speak and teach is through experience only, and this podcast and all of its teachings are not to replace professional healthcare industries or needs. As for mystic psychology, it is an ancient Hermetic teaching, a lost art and form of knowledge that's within humanity that intertwines spirituality and alchemy with the cosmos, and how it works with the psychology of humanity and dis-ease, and ultimately, the mind. Dis-ease, I will briefly touch on as well, seeing as it's a unique pronunciation, is my perspective and a preferred pronunciation of the word disease. On this journey, I have found that dis-ease explains all ailments much simpler and in a preferred format than our modern-day studies of disease. Dis-ease enunciates a disturbance in the body. This could be any layer of the body: physical, mental, emotional, sexual, auric, and all the others within and around us that affect us all. So more about the simplistic differences and why I've converted to this terminology and why it may resonate with you on a deeper level on another episode. For this one, we are diving right into one of my main specialties: PTSD, complex, and compound. Each are similar and different at the same time, just like every paradox on this spiritual journey. So my goal is to expand your mental horizons on how these dis-eases and others affect you on an etheric level, ultimately involving the fifth element of spirit or the ether, and helping my clients and all you listeners step into your own healing abilities through mental and emotional alchemy. Knowing that you absolutely can transmute every ailment, whether it be physical or mental, and since mental and emotional are the causes of physical, we want to nip all dis-ease in the bud, while enlightening ourselves and the world of our true abilities. Abilities that we have lost touch with, forgotten about, and that are calling to us now, very loudly, awaiting our own remembering through the work of healing and the spiritual journeys we are all walking this very day. And this isn't easy. I will be the first to tell you, I understand deeply at my core the extent of stress, confusion, fear, and exhaustion that the healing journey can bring. It's like being a horse with the carrots, constantly dangling in front of us. And when we reach that carrot, it's so soul nourishing that we can't even begin to think about stopping the pursuit of this happiness, this healing, and this ascension we are moving towards. I don't think there's a single one of us waking up to this spiritual prowess of this world that would ever decide to actually stop the work, because we just can't. We have so much support and love and encouragement that we can't even always see or hear. It's a feeling, though, an undeniable compass pointing us to the north node of our lives, and that same energy pushing us forward from the tail end at the very same time. I, personally, always use the cookie analogy in place of the carrot. When I was in psychosis, I would refer to the breaks and reprieves in between the deep, dark lessons, the purgatory, and chaos as cookies. I'd been in the midst of flashbacks and torment and lessons and ancient teachings and voices screaming at me. And then all of a sudden, a literal light stream of information would be transmitted through, so briefly, yet so profound, that it would just make everything stop. And that cookie, in that moment, made all the sense and gave me the strength to continue on. I hope in doing this podcast and the signature course that I offer, any of the one-on-one work, however it is you come to find me or know my work, this is what I hope for you constantly. you always have the strength to continue on because you are worth it. And I want this journey to make sense and bring you abundant light in all of your darkest hours of transmuting pain into healing, to where eventually the light absorbs the darkness and you know more greatness than you ever did pain. That you reprogram every neural pathway that ever led to pain and instead recreate, remember, re-energize the pathways that lead to your divinity, your divine purpose, your dharma, and your fulfillment. So, without further ado, I will move on to the topic of our conversation today, praying much illumination to aid you on your way. PTSD, complex, compound, they are not just about trauma. They are about the ways trauma intersects with consciousness, identity, and even the unseen aspects of healing. Visualize a train and its tracks going across a highway. And this train crashes into a car on the highway while an airplane falls from the sky and smashes into them as well. Add in a helicopter or multiple trains and cars, depending on the types and layers of traumas you have experienced. And at the end of the scenario, you have nothing other than a giant mess of destruction, probably ready to explode due to the heat and fuel and friction. And there is no river nearby to save you. Or at least, so we would think. When in reality, we ourselves are the rivers of healing and extinguishing that we need to eliminate the explosions and start clearing out all of the debris and washing it all away. I mean, come on, we're majorly made of water. And it doesn't come out of us when we poke holes in our bodies. So what's that about? We'll get to that later on another episode. So, while PTSD, complex, and compound are widely discussed in psychological terms, mystic psychology invites us to look deeper. It invites us to consider how trauma shapes not only the mind, as well as the spirit, and how healing can become an act of divine transformation. Beginning with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, from a mystic perspective, PTSD is what happens when a single, overwhelming event fragments the flow of energy within the body and mind. Think of it as an energetic wound, an experience so intense that the system goes into survival mode, freezing parts of itself in time. This could be caused by a combative experience, a natural disaster, a violent assault, or any event that overwhelms the brain's ability to process and cope. I'm going to take a minute to repeat this last part again. Any event that overwhelms one's brain's ability to process and cope. I make a point to hone in on this aspect because I want to shed light on the fact that trauma is not a competition. One-upping each other on who has experienced worse trauma is a complete ego move. It's self-centered in your own pain. It's idolizing the harmonics of the negative industry that we have come to know. And it's, part of systemic trauma, generational trauma, as well as the, oh, I'm tougher than nails brutality kind of complex. So my trauma is not worse or easier than another person's. Now, the physical experiences of the trauma I suffered would be considered horrendous. However, it's still equal to another person's trauma because of our unique buildup. Each person is created uniquely in their own way by the conscious creator. So therefore, the number 10 may traumatize someone, and the number 100 may traumatize another. They are both trauma though, and one should never be bypassed in comparison to the other. So, I've known far too many people that have downplayed their own trauma because they didn't think it was as severe as my own or as someone else's. Don't do that. Stop doing that. Your trauma deserves just as much attention and value and equality as another person's. Because if you don't give it that, you will continue to give others power over you and your own healing journey. We don't want to do that. We want to reclaim our healing energy. We want to be the one steering ourselves on our healing journey. So yes, in this 3D paradigm, we may distinguish a car accident versus a sexual assault survivor as very different traumas. And while they are different, they still mutate the brain in similar ways. That's what I'm trying to get to, right? Like the happiness of having a baby and the happiness of getting married are two different experiences, yet they both envelope love and gratitude and joy and appreciation and happy tears. And so happiness is happiness. Trauma is trauma. Later on, as we advance in our genetic materials inside of our body continue to raise in vibration, we'll see that there's not a whole lot of separation, not the type of separation that we have given it. And so this is what I'm trying to get to, is the severity of the incidents, the chemical makeup in the brain, the level of the emotional maturity of the individual. There are a million factors to take into account before ever trying to understand someone's trauma and how it affects them personally. And that is not your job to do. It is not my job to do. It is not anybody's job to do because it is their pathway for them. And accepting that with grace and compassion and humility even, and trusting that they're walking their path, no matter what it may be, is integral. So it's important to recognize that we are all uniquely wired. What deeply impacts one person may not affect another in the same way. And that's not a reflection of weakness. It's a reflection of beauty and the intricate blueprint of who we are. Each of us was created to be cherished, celebrated, and honored at all levels. This includes experiences as well. So this individuality is what makes us whole. A beautiful paradox we can deep dive into on another episode. Man, I'm promising a lot of future episodes here, so hopefully y'all are liking and subscribing to this podcast because that tells me you want to hear them. So with that understanding, I want to emphasize one more time that trauma, anyone's trauma, no one's trauma, is worse or better than another one's. The concept of comparing pain or struggle exists only in the context of our own perspectives, shaped by our unique experiences, and it can be attributed to the ego and its desire to be self-centered in its pain. Something as simple as a paper cut for one person could be deeply traumatizing, shaking their body, mind, and spirit in profound ways. For someone else, it might take a much more extreme event to create a similar effect. Neither experience is less valid than the other. Trauma still weaves its impact across the body, mind, psyche, spirit, and soul in intricate and profound ways, no matter the source. No one should ever diminish or dismiss someone else's pain because it wasn't traumatizing enough by their own standards. Now, I will always return to the poker game story to illustrate this. Imagine sitting around a poker table. The cards you're dealt represent your life's path, your challenges, joys, hardships, and celebrations. As the dealer finishes distributing the cards, and each player reveals their hand to one another, laying them all flat out on the table, something remarkable happens. No one reaches for someone else's cards. Each player begins to realize that the hand they were dealt is uniquely theirs, and they don't want anybody else's. It was uniquely crafted for their journey, and they wouldn't trade it. This is the essence of sovereignty. The recognition that our experiences, no matter how painful or joyous, are intrinsically ours and carry the potential for growth, understanding, and healing. Psychologically, PTSD manifests through a numerous amount of avenues. Spiritually, it represents a fracture in the connection between the self and the present moment. The nervous system, designed to protect us, becomes stuck in a perpetual state of alarm because it's not allowed to complete its system. It is like turning a computer on and then shutting it down halfway through and wondering why it won't start. It becomes stuck in a perpetual state. And in this case, for our bodies, a state of alarm, which kind of puts it on the repeat cycle, replaying the trauma as though it's still happening. In mystic psychology, this replay is not punishment, which is a lot of times how we perceive it because it comes back to the concept of, a punishing God creates a punishing society and vice versa. So we have a foundation of punishment just within humanity. And so we a lot of times tend to revert to things that are happening to us that are negative, that we didn't think we would want or didn't think that we created in some way, shape, or form, is somehow something punishing us. When in reality, it's a message. It's the body and soul's way of saying, this needs to be witnessed. This needs to be processed. And this needs to be integrated. We need to move into these types of universal truths and knowing as a society. And you doing this work is aiding in that journey and that uplifting. I look at it as the image of my higher self choosing to funnel certain information back down to me for me to experience in a safe environment to pursue healing. This is when I'm having anxiety attacks or flashbacks, things like that. My higher self chooses when I have those items or those repeat experiences to process. PTSD also manifests in Claire-like symptoms that can cause someone to feel crazy and out of control and even scared for their life. Voices, sounds, scents, they can all come flooding back at times that we have no control over. In my journey, I have found my higher self is always in control. However, the first 4 to 5 years of psychosis, I wasn't sure I trusted that or believed it. I mean, and you got to think, each year I got better. However, it took me a long time to really understand and dissect that I was safe throughout it because it was terrifying. And flashbacks and everything else, even if it's not something that you would label as a psychosis, it is still terrifying. And again, no separation. I mean, I think the different levels understand the type of healing that we need to go through. And some of us, have variations in journeys, but that's also because our blueprints vary and we are here for very specific reasonings to do very specific things. So my higher self speaks to me through my trauma and only languages that I can understand. And it took me quite a few years to figure this out, let alone, again, begin to actually trust it. So what if there is a direct connection between how we experience painful memories and these horrific symptoms and our higher self? That would be absurd, right? Not. Well, in the world of mystic psychology, it definitely is not. It is a higher understanding and forming relationship with the self. We just have never been taught how to navigate it, let alone that the concept was even possible. So now, let's expand the conversation to include complex and some compound we'll trickle into. So, psychology, the modern day, sums everything up to PTSD stemming from one single event and complex arising from prolonged or repeated trauma, particularly when there's no escape or safety. This might include child neglect, domestic abuse, or systemic oppression. However, from a mystic psychological perspective, complex reflects how prolonged trauma not only fragments the energy of the self, but reshapes it entirely. It creates layers of survival mechanisms, emotional regulation challenges, distorted self-perception, and difficulty trusting others. These aren't just symptoms, they are adaptations. They are the ways the soul has learned to survive in a world that felt unsafe for far too long. In complex, the wounds run deeper. The trauma becomes part of the survivor's identity, not because they choose it, but because it's been ingrained over time. So it's programming, it's brainwashing. However, mystic psychology reminds us that even the deepest wounds hold the potential for alchemy. Healing from complex isn't about erasing the past. It's about transforming the survival mechanisms into pathways of strength and connection. Again, let go of all comparisons with other stories. The separation between PTSD and complex only exists for me, so I understand the various layers, how to dissect them, and how to target, heal each one. Also, if you have had even 2 experiences in life that have possibly left you with PTSD, that could then start to be considered complex in my book. because now you have multiple layers of trauma to untangle, and that truly is complex healing. Not to mention, it would also be considered compound if it's two separate layers being suppressed against one another. Interwoven traumas and behaviors are much harder to untangle, and if we would just learn how to utilize healing on a daily basis as an integral part of our everyday, we could greatly reduce the probability that trauma has to compound upon us. No pun intended there for the compound trauma reference. So we're going to take a deeper dive into all of this, though, right now. And from a mystic psychological perspective, PTSD is what happens when a single overwhelming event fragments the flow of energy within the body and the mind. Again, we're back to the energetic wound, but this is only the surface layer. If we integrate our understanding of complex trauma and compound trauma, the way PTSD manifests is not linear, it's fractal, a multi-dimensional fragmentation of self that extends beyond a singular wound. So let's break this down. The fracturing of the self, trauma as a splitting of consciousness, would be the overview, and then we'll break it down a little bit further. So one thing that often gets overlooked in trauma discussions is the way trauma fractures consciousness, not just in the sense of dissociation, but in the way it forces a person to create multiple versions of themselves just to survive. When psychosis was first setting in, I was terrified, and I literally thought I was going to end up getting diagnosed with not only schizophrenia, but multiple personality disorder, because all of these multiple versions of myself came to life in my mind, which probably would have deserved that diagnosis. However, I was able to, I was connected directly to source, like all of us always are. And I just had this funnel of safety and information that was slowly trickling down from my higher self to know that there was more to it. And so I had to unveil it to myself throughout the psychosis as I was taught the different layers. So one self remains stuck in the past, reliving and responding to the trauma as if it's still happening. Another self learns to function in the present world, often adopting masks to conform, comply, or avoid the pain altogether. Another self holds the intuitive knowing that things are not meant to be this way. And this voice is often drowned out by fear and conditioning, and really just our society not having the answers to really aid in the healing of these types of things. And then if you have multiple layers of trauma, that original one self that we first talked about remaining stuck in the past, we can get stuck in multiple different eras. I remember working through at first it was the decades. So I would work through the decades of my life and dissect those and heal those. And then I eventually got to the point where I worked through every single year backwards. Because each year had pivotal moments that created different parts of my identity. And we can absolutely get to that on another topic level on some day. So the more trauma is stacked, whether it's complex, compound, or systemic, generational, whatever it may be, the more these selves drift apart. The work of healing is the work of integration, of remembering, of becoming whole again. That is what we are here to do. That is what we are here alchemizing. This idea aligns deeply with mystic psychology and spiritual alchemy, because healing trauma is not just about restoring mental health. It is about calling back these lost parts of the soul. Every trauma is a disconnection, a severance, a forgetting. Healing is the great remembering. So the first fracture, the freeze in time, and what people would maybe analogize as PTSD in the most basic form, occurs when the nervous system becomes overwhelmed and unable to process the event. We have a pretty clear understanding of that. And if you don't, that's okay. It's not a big deal. Some of us are really still on the new end of our journey. But Google has a lot of information too, whenever it comes to what is PTSD? How does PTSD work? And this is one of those basic, generic kind of, okay, this is what it is. And it's causing it to fragment reality into before and after. So this part is a little bit more introspective. The fact that it breaks down, okay, we know that we become overwhelmed and we enter into freeze, fight, flight, and some people consider fawn now a response as well. And I understand why completely. However, the next part of it is it causes a separation in reality. Everything that I was, who I am, what I was, how life was before, and how it is after. So the moment of trauma freezes in time and creates a ripple effect that separates the past from the future. And part of the psyche remains stuck in this experience. The body doesn't realize the event is over, so it stays in a state of hypervigilance. The mind replays the event because it's stored in the amygdala since it hasn't been processed out, trying to make sense of something it couldn't process. And the soul fractures because trauma isn't just mental, it's an interruption of the spirit's connection to its own timeline. This is why flashbacks feel so real, because they are real to the part of the psyche that is still living in the past. The conscious mind may have moved forward, but the traumatized self exists in a different time space entirely. So this is that part of the self that moves on day to day and puts on a face and avoids the pain. Whereas the other part of your conscious mind is still back there and it's very real for it, which therefore makes it very, very real for you. So what happens when trauma isn't just about one event though? It's about many. That is the second fracture, the compound trauma and the layering of the wounds. When multiple traumatic events occur over time, each wound builds upon the last, creating an energetic stacking effect where every new trauma reinforces the ones before it. However, it also splits the reality that many times as well. That's why they're so significant in our memories, right? Like when we look back and we're like, this happened to us, and this happened to us, and this happened to us. And we hold on to those memories so vividly because they create this emotional wound inside of us. And it's literally a rip within us, like a rip in time, in our time-space continuum and our us, each person's blueprint. So a single event may create PTSD. Repeated traumas compound and magnify the fragmentation. The nervous system does not reset. Instead, each trauma echoes and reinforces the unresolved ones, stacking on and building on to an unsettled and very disturbing foundation. The subconscious mind starts seeing patterns and interpreting reality through the lens of accumulated trauma, even when no threat is present. We just constantly live in a state of hypervigilance where a threat is around every corner. And so we never have the peace or the balance to respond. We only ever react. And that is what we want to break free from. This is why someone with compound trauma may find themselves reacting to small triggers as if they were catastrophic events. The brain has learned this feels familiar, therefore it must be dangerous. And it can't separate between the two, because it's so compounded and compacted, like a ball of yarn with a million different colors in it whenever they're all supposed to be separated, right? So it's basically like that. This stacking of trauma amplifies the fracture of the self, causing the consciousness to operate in multiple timelines simultaneously. Some parts of the psyche remain frozen in past traumas, while others attempt to move forward, resulting in an internal war between the past and the present. And the third fracture, complex trauma and the fractalization of the soul, this is where we go deeper. Complex is not just a disorder. It is an alchemical splitting of self across time and space. If PTSD is a single fracture and compound trauma is stacked fragmentation, then complex trauma is a fractalization of consciousness itself. The psyche does not just freeze, it splinters. Identity does not just become wounded, it fragments into multiple disconnected selves. The nervous system does not just overreact, it adapts into an entirely new survival-based personality. This is where mystic psychology intersects with trauma healing. Because when we examine trauma through the lens of alchemy, consciousness, and energy, we realize that trauma doesn't just affect the body. It alters the fundamental structure of our reality. A fractal is an infinite pattern where each part mirrors the whole. We are all fractals of God's source, consciousness, creator. We mirror the whole back to each other. And we'll get to that later on down the road. So trauma operates fractally. one wound multiplying at many, manifesting in different areas of life. As above, so below. Our external world reflects our internal fragmentation. So therefore, all these fractalizations within us that go unhealed, we create more of these experiences around us until we learn how to heal it. That's why we repeat traumas. That's why we repeat the types of relationships we get into. Have you ever noticed that people, and I have been one of these people, and I have also observed it, that, the first romantic relationship is, they cuss, they yell, they scream at each other. The second one, there's a little bit more physical abuse. And then the third one is just outright, domestic violence day and night, because we keep growing on those trauma bonds that are created within these traumatic experiences. And when we don't stop to pause and heal ourselves in between each relationship, whether it be platonic, romantic, professional, whatever it might be, where there was pain and anguish and trauma experienced on any level whatsoever, if we do not take the time to go through the grieving process and make it all the way through acceptance and all the rest to where we have this peace within us and forgiveness granted to all involved, including ourselves, then we just continue to create the same experiences, unfortunately. And it's dire for all of us. And so the awareness needs to come too. When a person experiences years of chronic emotional, mental, or physical distress, the soul itself fractals into different versions of the self, each holding pieces of the trauma. One part remains trapped in childhood, carrying the emotions that were never validated. That's our inner child, right? What if ultimately on this journey, we culminate the ability to be one with ourselves completely, and that there never be any separation again? Like, I know I have an inner child. I know that I am still healing that inner child. I also have an inner adolescent that I am still healing that comes out sometimes in anger. And then I also have my tweenie. My tweenie is all of my 20s for the most part. And then I also have someone in my 30s who thankfully has been on this journey the whole time. So it's, been much more peaceful. However, I am still healing and integrating those parts of me to where I am eventually whole, and I see no separation between any of them because they're all at peace. So one part remains trapped in childhood, carrying the emotions that were never validated. One part becomes hyper independent, rejecting vulnerability because it equates to danger. For me, that's my inner adolescent. One part self-sabotages, believing success or happiness is unsafe. That's a lot of my tweens. And one part disassociates, disconnecting from reality altogether to avoid further pain. And I believe that part happened in childhood, right? That's when the disassociation began. So we become a collection, a conscious collection of fragmented identities, all trying to survive in a world that never taught us how to integrate. This is why healing isn't just about processing memories. It's about reclaiming lost pieces of the self and reintegrating them into the very present moment. So, if PTSD is a rupture in time and complex trauma is a fractalization of the soul, then healing is the great reintegration, where we reclaim every lost part of ourselves. I was going to say every lost power of ourselves, which kind of resonates in another way too, right? If healing is the great reintegration, where we reclaim every lost power of ourselves and bring that power back into the now, because you are not your trauma. You are the one who survived it. And yes, in the beginning stages, we are all survivors. And then eventually we turn into thrivers. And then there's stages after that as well. You are the one who will transform because of all of it. So instead of fearing your fractures, begin gathering them. Instead of mourning your lost self, begin retrieving them, because your soul is waiting for you to remember. You were never meant to stay broken. In fact, you're never really truly broken. Remember, these pieces are reflections of a whole. And again, there's another beautiful paradox, and we will have to do an episode on paradoxes and what all that means and break that down, because I use that word way too much. So from a mystic psychological, and I also use the word way too much. From a mystical psychological perspective, trauma is more than just a psychological wound. It is a disruption of the soul's energetic blueprint and an alteration in the way we connect to source, intuition, and higher consciousness. Complex and compound traumas create energetic fractures, making it difficult to trust in a higher power or feel aligned with the universe's flow. Trauma distorts the frequency of our thoughts and emotions, often attracting experiences that reinforce old wounds. It limits neural and energetic plasticity, keeping the subconscious mind anchored in past survival rather than spiritual evolution. However, just as alchemy transforms base metals into gold, conscious healing of trauma allows us to transmute pain into power. The process of trauma recovery in mystic psychology is not just about rewiring the brain. It's about repairing energetic circuits, releasing stored emotional imprints, and reestablishing a connection with source. We then pivot to alchemy. And this is where the alchemical process of transformation requires its different stages. And there are different approaches to different processes of alchemy. I'm going to break down mildly two of the ones that I know the best. So there's a 3-stage process, which is separation, identifying what has been broken, purification, bringing awareness to the wounds without judgment, and integration, reuniting the fragmented aspects into wholeness. Or Jung has 4 stages of alchemy, which are also very useful, and breaks it down maybe a little bit more. And not necessarily that one is better than the other, but sometimes we need a gentler, longer path than an abrupt alchemical one. And so one with maybe more stages might give that little bit of reprieve. It just depends on where you are in your journey. So the 4 stages of Jung's theory of alchemy, which I like just as much, are confession, illumination, insight, and transformation. And again, future episode will break it all down. Because here's the truth about healing trauma. We are not here to go back to who we were before the trauma. I'm going to repeat that one again. We are not here to go back to who we were before the trauma. So stop trying to. I know it's what's comfortable and all we've ever known up until the points of the pain. However, we have to go forward. You have to understand that the person that you are becoming through the trauma is so fucking magical and so amazing and so empowered and enigmatic and irresistible and filled with light and abundance and gold. That is where you are going through this. I promise you. I freaking promise you. I bet every aspect of my being on it. As an alchemical master, as a hermeticist, as all of these things, I believe in this and I believe in you and the journey that you are on. And it does lead to fulfillment. And it's more fulfilling than anything you would have ever chosen otherwise, or you wouldn't have chosen it to begin with. And it does not mean that we are responsible for what somebody else did to us or anything like that. Please do not take that out of context. We are here to become the version of ourselves that could only exist because we walked through it and we stopped trying to go back to before it happened. Trauma is not just something to survive. It is something to alchemize. The moment we stop seeing trauma as something that happened to us and start seeing it as something that is awakening us, we reclaim our power. There is too much of it in society and in history to not begin to understand that it is meant to stir us in a way that transforms us and leads us to the reclamation of our power. We are not supposed to just sit in it. We no longer need to suffer. We no longer need to squander in it and repeat it and live in the trauma of our ancestors. Healing is the art of taking fragmentation and turning it into divine wholeness. And that, my friends, that is true alchemy. So we're going to touch a little bit on the neuroscience part of it. I'd like to bring a little bit of that aspect into it because it is all part of a wholeness. And awakening to these truths, we sometimes want to apply tangible evidence to things. And so I like to help aid that in some way. But I would also always like to remind everyone that we don't need tangible evidence to know what we know. However, sometimes it's scary to admit that we know what we know, and we don't necessarily have to admit it to other people. I get it. Coming out of the energetic closet, woo closet, whatever you want to call it, can be scary. And we judge ourselves at first and we fear about the judgment of others and things like that. So I just like to add as many layers of educational things that show up for me to the podcast. So neuroscience shows that neuroplasticity, the rewiring of the brain and the brain's ability to rewire itself, okay? The brain is self-healing if we allow the process. So just like a computer can clean itself or reformat or reboot itself with some, code entering or a click of a button, we have to learn how to allow that system. We have to learn how to click those buttons and put that code in. And so which is possible through intention, mindfulness, self-compassion. My freebie that is coming out soon, it is all about how to aid your brain in rewiring itself and showing you its true healing capacity. Similarly, in mystic traditions, healing trauma is about shifting vibrational states. Pretty much, it's the same concept. Everything is vibration, so therefore the brain's ability to rewire itself means that it is shifting a vibrational state, which means that it is mystic. And it dissolves fear-based imprints and then realigns with higher consciousness. Again, connecting you with your innate wholeness, your magic, your alchemical abilities, whatever it may be. Shadow work and deep introspection reprogram limiting subconscious beliefs that were instilled by trauma. So shadow work will always and forever be, at this time and place, very, very important. One day we won't need it though. So anyways, somatic practices also, like the breath work of somatic practices, help the breath move and reset the body's trauma and stored responses. Like when it's stored so deep in our muscles, I know that somatic breath work, there have been times that it physically hurt to do somatic breath work because of how tight and deep it was stored in my shoulder and back muscles, because where I carried the weights for so long of the trauma and, feeling like I had to save the world and everybody else, including myself, and trying to take that load on. Spiritual practices such as meditation, energy healing, and quantum visualization, they rebuild the soul's energetic integrity and strengthen intuitive pathways. In essence, complex trauma creates wounds in identity and safety, while compound trauma builds layers of distress that magnify instability. Both can be alchemized through healing, both scientifically and spiritually. Healing trauma is not just about getting out of survival. It's about reclaiming clarity, sovereignty, and the divine blueprint of the self. We're touching on a deeper truth about the nature of trauma, one that isn't limited to personal experience. It extends into the collective, systemic, and societal conditioning we've all been immersed in. Trauma isn't just something that happens in isolation. It's often layered, woven into our collective consciousness, and reinforced by the very structures we're expected to abide by. If we step back and examine the way humans have historically treated one another through war, oppression, punishment, forced religious indoctrination, and hierarchical control, it becomes clear that we, as a species, have been emotionally immature for generations. We've been acting out of patterns of survival-based responses rather than higher consciousness. We treat each other harshly because we've never been taught how to handle emotions with grace. We punish rather than guide because our societal structures were built on fear, not trust, and this is including religion. We expect compliance rather than personal evolution because control has been more valuable to power structures than true growth. This collective emotional immaturity has created a cycle where trauma is both personal and systemic. Many of us weren't just hurt by individuals. We were conditioned by societal paradigms that do not allow for true emotional and spiritual expansion. So unlearning trauma is the act of revolution. Healing trauma isn't just about inner work. It is also about dismantling the programming that we've been conditioned into. It is rewiring the way we experience reality, questioning the structures we've accepted as normal, quote unquote, normal, and choosing to reprogram our minds, bodies, and spirits beyond survival and into conscious evolution. Unlearning trauma is all about deconditioning from a scarcity and punishment-based worldview. reclaiming our ability to process emotions rather than suppress or react to them, seeing trauma as a multi-layered structure that includes personal pain, generational wounding, and systemic control, choosing conscious connection over automatic compliance. I said that word wrong. My apologies. This is where mystic psychology and trauma healing intersect, because true healing isn't just about neuroscience. It's not just about what we can prove that we can see. It's about rewiring reality itself. It's about understanding that the pain of our past is embedded in more than just memory. It's embedded in the very frequency of the systems we operate within. And that means healing isn't just personal. It's part of a much larger alchemical shift in human consciousness. If trauma has kept us stuck in a low-frequency cycle of fear, punishment, and emotional immaturity, then healing is the bridge to a new paradigm, one that allows for actual sovereignty, emotional intelligence, and conscious evolution. This is the work of alchemy. It's the unraveling of generations of conditioning, and it is the single greatest act of personal and collective power we can reclaim. One radical yet necessary perspective shift is seeing systemic trauma for what it really is: an abusive relationship on a mass scale. Governments gaslight us into thinking we are free while conditioning us into compliance. Religions, not spirituality, shame us into believing we are unworthy of direct connection to source. Capitalism rewards burnout, extraction, and competition over well-being and community. The legal system punishes those who break its rules, yet excuses itself when it breaks its own rules. When a person is in a toxic or abusive relationship, they often question themselves, feel trapped, or struggle to believe they deserve better. The same applies to societal structures. The system conditions us to accept trauma as normal, just as an abuser conditions their victim into believing they deserve mistreatment. The unlearning of trauma is also the unlearning of obedience to the system. Healing is not just about personal resilience. It is about stepping out of the mental and emotional captivity that has kept humanity small. This perspective aligns with Hermetic and alchemical traditions, which have long taught that as above, so below, as within, so without. The trauma inside us is a mirror of the trauma embedded into the fabric of the world. Our healing is a micro-revolution that sends ripples into the macro realm. And one reason trauma is so hard to release is because it is familiar. Pain is predictable. We know how to exist inside it. Healing, on the other hand, is unfamiliar territory. We are in a completely revolutionary state of time. Healing asks us to step into a new unknown, to take responsibility for our freedom, and to shed the very identity we built around our survival. I want to just repeat the part, to take responsibility for our freedom, which means we can't force anybody else to take responsibility for their actions or anything that has happened to us. We have to take responsibility for our freedom no matter what they do. We need to shut them out, set up our boundaries with kindness and compassion, and move on into peace and into freedom. Many people unconsciously cling to trauma because it has become their anchor to reality. It is the only thing that they have ever known, and it is what they have laid their foundation on and what their basis for all of their behavior on, and it is their anchor. And the reality of it is that anchor weighs them down. It weighed me down for a long, long time, at least 2 decades of my life. Healing threatens the ego's constructed sense of self as well, because that self, that foundation, was built inside the trauma. A healed version of you is a free version of you. And freedom is terrifying if you've never had it before. And I can 100% vouch for that, like so much that it brings tears to my eyes. Because I don't even know if we really know what freedom truly is, because we're still working at it. I know that I am. I know that I'm in the stages of my life where I feel freedom, and I know that I am free from who I used to be and the life that I lived. However, I know that there's bigger and better things coming, and I'll probably get teary-eyed again when I experience that, because it'll be a whole new layer. So just like we've had layers of trauma there's going to be layers of freedom, and they are glorifying, and they are beautiful, and they are uplifting, and I could just cry. Oh my gosh. All right. Whew. This is why the journey out of trauma is not just about learning new behaviors or, okay, I got to meditate. I got to do this. I got to do that. Like, we don't want to do this on a surface level at all. We want to be inspired when we do it. And yes, in the beginning, we fake it till we make it. We do it. We push through because sometimes that's just what we need to do. It truly is. You know what I mean? However, it leads to the dissolving of the illusions that kept us bound to pain in the first place when we do this work. Mystically speaking, this is where alchemy and shadow work converge and have a baby. So trauma lives in the shadow, and we are afraid to look at it because we think it is darkness, and, darkness is taboo. But the great paradox is that what we fear in the shadow is actually the missing pieces of our wholeness. It's actually these fractal parts of our wholeness that we just can't see that are extremely valuable because we have been taught to disconnect from them, even in some circumstances, that they are bad. And so therefore those should not be a part of us, right? Like anger should not be a part of us. Greed should not be a part of us. Things like that. Jealousy, revenge, all of those things should not be a part of us, quote unquote. So trauma healing is not a destruction. It is a resurrection of what was lost and is now found and is now understood on a higher conscious vibration. And so the call to remember the trauma healing as a sacred task that we are all here to complete for ourselves. At its deepest level, trauma is an interruption of the soul's original path. When we heal, we are not just getting better or recovering from a disorder. We are undoing a distortion in our timeline, realigning with who we were meant to be, and reclaiming our divine connection. The modern world tells us trauma healing is about resilience, about bouncing back. Mystically speaking, it is so much more than that. Healing is a return to self, a return to sovereignty, a return to source. However, it's like a trip around the world, right? Like Amelia Earhart didn't, start in New York and then go to Germany and then decide to go back to New York and call her journey complete. No, she went around the whole world. So healing is a return to self in that concept. We have to cross the bridge of going around the whole world, our whole lifetime, and then we return to sovereignty because everything in between is an experience. Her journey was an experience, a magnificent one, I can only imagine, of all the sights that she got to see and the beauty and the wonder, and probably some very torrential or terrifying times even, given, weathers or anything like that. And so we can compare that to our traumas, right? And to our emotional difficulties and disturbances and things that really caused us pain, whether it be labeled as trauma or just emotional difficulties, because there is a separation between those as well, which we will tap into at a later episode. So going through the whole journey is a return to sovereignty. It is a return to source. Every healed individual is an activated ripple in the collective energy field. This is why the system does not want people to heal. And when I say that, I don't want to say it in an accusatory manner. It's just that we've all been in this lower vibrational energy of consciousness where we weren't conscious enough to realize that what we were doing is harming each other. Because healed people cannot be controlled. And while I know that there's people that live on the paradigms and the understandings that people are really out to get us and that reptilians really wanted to hurt us and stuff like that, I don't live on that timeline anymore. I live on a timeline that reptilians have transformed themselves, and any that did not are no longer affecting Earth. The power is too great. It is too beautiful. It is too amazing for what we are doing. And so moving forward, people that don't want other people to heal, their conscious vibration is just so low, and the work that we're doing is eventually going to raise it for them as well. Or again, it's going to happen in that split where they just no longer apply and they're not going to be relevant to our timeline. So trauma fractured the human species over centuries, yes. Healing will reunite us, and that is the real awakening. I think we're all kind of aware of that when it comes down to the basics and the simplicity of it. So your healing is an act of defiance. And it's a beautiful defiance. Let it be the one act of defiance that you do. We don't want to go out and we don't want to cause harm and judge and do negative thoughts and things like that. And we're all learning how to not do those things. So if you do those things, don't shame yourself either, because none of us are perfect. We are perfect, but we're also imperfect. So healing isn't just about personal liberation. It is an act of defiance against a world that profits off of your suffering. It is going to be us that changes the world. It is going to be the things that we do that raise the vibration, and it is going to be us as a whole that changes everything. And so when you choose to heal, you are rejecting the system's programming. You are splitting yourself off from that negative vibratory consciousness that is still lingering within humanity. And you are saying, I will no longer be ruled by fear. I will no longer be conditioned into smallness, and I will reclaim my consciousness and my connection to source. However, if you feel better, also, I would eventually leave out all the negatives in that, because of course, talking about fear creates fear and implants it, same with smallness and things like that. So we will find peace. We will find balance. We will find freedom and prosperity, and we will stand in our sovereignty with our purest divine connection to source. And when enough of us do this, the entire paradigm shifts. And we have been doing it, which is why we have been seeing the paradigms kind of breaking apart. So the healing, being the ultimate defiance, is really the silent revolution. It's the revolution that is perfect. It is the peaceful protest that moves mountains. It is the protest for peace that changes the vibration of the world. It is the silent revolution. And as we awaken to these deep and often disturbing truths, it's easy to feel an urge to resist, to fight, to push against the system directly. And the truth is, our healing is the only defiance that we truly need. We don't need to choose sides, argue, or judge others for where they are in their journey. That only keeps us locked in the very paradigms we are trying to break free from: division, conflict, control, and suffering. The real revolution is internal. Healing is the most radical act of defiance because it dissolves the very structures that have thrived on our pain. When you heal, you no longer seek validation through competition. When you heal, you release the need for external authority to tell you what is true. When you heal, you step out of fear-based control systems because you trust yourself. And that is something that they have taught us that we cannot do. And so we are changing that. And this is no small task. We have been trained to constantly look outside of ourselves for God, for love, for approval, for a sense of identity. We were raised in systems that profit off our insecurity, our fear, our division, our addictions, our mental health, our physical health. Choosing to turn inward is not just a shift in mindset. It is an unlearning of generations of conditioning. At first, it feels unnatural, maybe even impossible. You might feel resistance, you might feel doubt, you might feel like this is way too big, how could this ever happen? This too is part of the process. Even if you have to fake it till you make it, you better keep going. Because the better you treat yourself, the more you choose self-respect, self-kindness, and self-empowerment, the more naturally it will become your truth. And you will reflect that out just by being who you are, walking past somebody on the street. They will feel that energy and it will start to sink into theirs. And you can activate them just by simply being in the same area as them without words. That again, another real Very real example of alchemy. The more you heal, the more defiant you become. Not because you are fighting against something. It's because you are no longer feeding it. Every time that you choose peace over reactivity, self-worth over shame, and healing over projection, you weaken the grip of the old paradigm. That is how the system collapses. Not through war, through irrelevance. The structures built on suffering cannot sustain themselves if people simply stop participating in them. And that is how we step into a brand new era. And it's not going to happen all at once. It is a seamless shift, little by little and bit by bit. And it has already been ongoing for quite some time. And we still have quite a ways to go. This is the quiet revolution of consciousness. No banners, no battles, just individuals choosing to break free, one healing at a time. It actually really combats your ego, right? Like, we can't hold up the banners. We can't fly the flags. You know what I mean? Like, we can't, we can admit that we've been in battle in some regards, but then again, that's feeding our ego, right? Like, this is really a conscious revolution with beautiful, beautiful lessons in humility and humbleness. And that really, really raises our frequency together when we can step into those spiritual principles as well as many more. So I went on this little tangent because I wanted to come back and say that it's very apparent to me that we all carry some form of PTSD. But this does not mean that we play the victim. The truth is, we all have some variation of PTSD, the complex of it, or the deep-rooted conditioning and compounding it. Some may have endured extreme traumas, while others carry the weight of generational wounds, systemic oppression, or cultural programming that has disconnected them from their true selves. The key here, though, here is the key. I'm giving you the key to unlock the door. The key is not to play the victim card. And we might all have a little relapse in it, when something first happens. But the awareness and the repetition of pulling us out of victimhood is going to be incremental in the stages of alchemy and how we proceed forward. This is not about blaming the world or society or our past for where we are now. Instead, it is an invitation to understand the power within us, to recognize that we've been through what we've been through is not the end of our story. It is the catalyst for our awakening. To understand that if we had not gone through that, we would not be experiencing the ability to walk into magic and to really understand who we truly are at a soul level and not a human level, to be enlightened for the fact that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and that this is a beautiful journey. Our past laid the ground for us to be able to do this. It is the catalyst for our awakening. Dis-ease is not just physical. It is an energetic message. And when we experience trauma, mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical, it creates disturbances in the body's energetic field. Anxiety, depression, chronic illness, inflammation, fatigue, the list can go on and on. Neurodivergence, all the rest of them. These are not random afflictions. And they're not at random times either, right? Like, as we will dissect at some point in time, the waves of consciousness for all the different variations that have hit, right? Like how all of a sudden these things are becoming very noticeable and very in our faces. And they've come in different waves over time and history. These are not random afflictions. They didn't, they are conversations that consciousness is trying to have with us. And therefore, personally, on a personal blueprint, they are conversations that your higher self, your body, your mind, everything about you is trying to have with you, to show you all the different ways that it is fractalized and all the different ways that it wants to come back together, to show you, to prove to you your innate wholeness. Your body isn't working against you. It never is. It's way too intelligent. It's way far more intelligent than our minds have comprehended or that science has proven. It is speaking to you in a language that we have not been able to understand. We've been conditioned to numb, ignore, or suppress symptoms instead of asking, what is this trying to tell me? Chronic anxiety? Your body may be showing you where fear has been stored. Unexplainable exhaustion? Your body may be forcing you to stop and rest so you can process suppressed emotions. Recurring illnesses or autoimmune issues? There could be unresolved grief, self-betrayal, or deep energetic misalignment that has been left unaddressed. Instead of finger pointing, blaming, or seeking external validation, the most powerful thing we can do is turn inward and listen. Because every symptom, every struggle, and every moment of dis-ease is an opportunity. It's a doorway into healing, expansion, and transformation. When we stop seeing trauma as something that happened to us and start recognizing it as something that is awakening us, we shift from powerlessness to sovereignty. Healing isn't about returning to who you were before. Remember, we're going to stop doing that. This episode is the commitment and the intention to stop doing that. It's now about becoming the version of yourself that could only exist because of it. And that is true power. That is a solid foundation that you can build a home on, that you can build your temple on, the temple of your body and your soul. So from the viewpoint of mystic psychology, trauma isn't just a disruption. It's a call to transform. PTSD and all of its variations are not punishments or defects. They are invitations. Invitations to reclaim the parts of ourselves that were fragmented, to rebuild the pathways of connection, and to align with a higher version of ourselves. This does not mean the process is easy. Flashbacks, emotional dysregulation, hypervigilance, so many symptoms can feel like being trapped in an endless cycle. Even within that cycle, though, there is wisdom. And if we start looking at it as such, we can find it. Because PTSD allows us to victimize ourselves way too easily. And therefore, we stay trapped in the cycle because we're blaming and shaming and judging and doing all of these things that keep us in a negative vibratory cycle. And so if we can say, this has wisdom in it, this has lessons in it, this has alchemy in it, we can begin to find ways out of the cycle. Even within that cycle, like what I'm seeing in my head is basically like going around and round and round, getting stuck in the cycle. And then as soon as you start to accept or even open your mind to the concept of alchemy and the wisdom that trauma holds within the body, these pathways start to open up, kind of like a roundabout opens up. Like I don't know if everybody knows what that is, but a roundabout, like at an intersection where you go around the loop, right? And you're just stuck going round and round and round and round. And then all of a sudden, all of these side streets start opening up. And that's where the wisdom leads you to. That's where transmutation leads you to. That's where the alchemy leads you to. So trauma holds the key to its own healing, which is, some might say, an ugly paradox, in all honesty, right? Like, that sucks. Like, trauma holds the key to its own healing. Like, what the, But again, everything is paradoxes. Everything in existence. Hot, cold, good and bad. All of those things. So by leaning into the process with compassion and curiosity, we begin to unlock the deeper layers of the understanding, of the growth, and of the liberation. So understanding PTSD, complex and compound, and all their various lenses is about more than just education. It's about empowerment. It's about reminding ourselves that healing is not only possible, it's also sacred. So whether you're navigating this dis-ease or supporting someone who is, mystic psychology invites you to see the journey as one of divine alchemy, where the pain and fragmentation are not erased. They are transformed into something meaningful and beautiful. And don't ever try to push this belief on someone that isn't ready for it, because they may only victimize themselves more, and that's everything that we want to avoid. So ultimately, you are not broken. You are becoming. Every tear, every flashback, every memory, every moment of the struggle is part of a larger process. A process of reclaiming your wholeness, your power, and your connection to source. Remember, trauma is not your identity. It's a chapter in your story. And while it may feel like a really long chapter in your story, like mine does, you hold the pen to write the rest. And if you know anything about the Akashic Records, then you should know that you are contributing to it in every existing moment. Your words are your pen. Your thoughts are your pen. What story are you currently writing? It's never too late to change the plot, rewrite the past, or design a whole new book. Legend has it that we have 2 books. Our soul has 2 books. The white one that is written for us in our charts and creator consciousness, and then the gold book that we write for ourselves. I'm in my gold book era, and I am blessed to be here. I'm Toriea, and I'm signing off for the day, hoping that we connected in so many ways. I look forward to our next episode together, and until then, keep healing, keep awakening, and keep reclaiming your power. Many blessings and namaste.